I'm out here at the homestead in the beautiful Sonoran Desert. My name's Kevin, and this is Cora. We're gonna do some digging. Alright, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter video. I want to get my excavator into my little workshop here. And that presented a couple issues, and I'm going to show you how I addressed those. I did some quick work in the driveway to improve the ramp up to the doorway there, since the plow on the front of the excavator doesn't have a lot of height on it, so you got to be careful going over curbs and stuff. So anyway, I got that addressed, and you can see as I roll up into the doorway that I'm not going to be able to get in because the ROPS, or the rollover protection, is just a little bit too tall. Initially, I had my attention on these bolts that hold it together kind of at the midsection. There's a top portion that's one piece, and then front and back are each separate leg pieces. And that seemed like the most logical place to try to break this thing down in order to make it so it wasn't too tall. It didn't seem like that top section would be terribly heavy. I already took off the roof, and I'm thinking, I'm working by myself, but I'm thinking that I can kind of just push that top section up and then somehow lift it down off of there. And yeah, that wasn't working out too well. So I had to go to plan B. I gave everything a good hard look and thought a lot about everything and different options on how to address this. It's pretty clear that I was going to have to assemble something to support some of the weight or somehow help to lift the thing off of there. But one thing I noticed is that the way the leg sections are on there, you can take the bolts out and it'll still just sit there, and it's free to move. You can move it laterally and you can move it up and down. Whereas with the middle section, you have to go up first and then somehow go over and down. So it's going to be a bit heavier with all the sections put together, but it seems like that's the right way to go. And here you can see it's sitting flat on the back as well. And there's also a good amount of room for that thing to move around, and it's not going to fall off. So I'm kind of keeping that in mind, and I sort of came up with an idea, and I'll show you how it worked out. So the crux of the solution kind of focuses around this basic arrangement of two poles kind of as stilts. And notice that it's resting on the track, which is going to stabilize the dimensions in terms of how those boards encounter the rest of the frame. So that seemed like a lot smarter idea than trying to build it off the ground. In this picture, there's actually two different things going on. The first is that even though that the ROPS sits kind of level on the chassis of the excavator, I didn't want to be scratching around metal on metal. So starting off with, I put wood underneath both the front and back. The other thing the wood's going to do for me here is it's going to allow me to extend the base of each of those leg sections out to the edge of the excavator where they can contact the stilts. And then once I established those measurements as to where those bottom pieces were going to contact, I added little cleats onto the stilts. And these are going to catch the edges of the boards. Here you can clearly see how all that comes together. Now, the ROPS itself is still loose on the boards. The boards are still loose on the excavator, and they aren't really attached yet to the stilts. So I got to resolve all those issues. I scrambled around in all my hardware, and I finally found some lag screws that would be about the right length so that I can use the existing mounting holes for the ROPS and go into the 2x4. And with a little bit of extra washers, I can avoid the point coming through on the other side. So now the legs of the ROPS are securely attached to these boards, and the boards are still sitting loose, and I've got wood on metal contact, so I'm not marring up the finish. So now when those boards are lined up on the stilts and sitting on those cleats, I can attach them so that they won't fall off of the cleats. And I used a couple nice long screws to do that. Next, I stabilized the stilts with some cross members, and I put them on in such a way that they'll make sure that those stilts don't rack. And also they're going to line up with the points that I want to attach to the ROPS. And you can see I stacked a bunch of 2x material and such to make some spacers, and you'll see that those will put it in contact with the ROPS. Next, I need to secure the ROPS to those contact points on the stilts. And to do that, I just used some clothesline rope and made some very simple lashings. And they're not super secure, but it's enough, and there's enough contact that it should be able to hold it all together for me. And one final thing I want to point out is that if you look there, you can see that the aux control pedal kind of sticks out a little bit into the area where the ROPS is. And so to compensate for that, I've got the wood as far forward as it can be when it's attached to the ROPS leg. And also I'm going to push the whole unit, the whole ROPS unit forward until as far as that knuckle will let me. And that should give me clearance away from that pedal. All right, so now is the time to put the whole thing to the test. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm not sure how this thing's going to hold together. All my calculations tell me that it should work, but you know how those things go. So a little bit of a reach to get the tip going, and now I got both feet on the ground. I got 2 hands on everything. Nothing's wobbling. Nothing's coming apart. Holy cow, it kind of worked. All right, and then the other thing is that I didn't want to have to drag this around or slide it around or pick it up, so I'm just going to roll it upside down and set it on itself. And the ROPS itself now is holding everything up, and that wood is just extra lumber. So there we go. All right, this excavator fits in here pretty nice. Let's see here, I got it almost to the door. And I wanted to be able to pull it in enough to be able to get around it and open stuff up without having to open these doors. And I got plenty of room. So that's better than I had hoped. I mean, there's not much else I could put in here, but I can definitely get to work on this thing. Before I get to the rest of the excavator, I want to go ahead and deal with the issues with this roof. And the first one is, it leaks water on me whenever I use it. And at first I thought it was rain coming through holes in the roof. But the amount of water that's coming through it's just too much to be rain leaking through little holes like this. The water is leaking down roughly in that area, but I always had the feeling like the water was coming from the metal piece, above the metal piece of the ROPS that holds the roof on. So I was kind of anxious to see what was under there, and sure enough, it looks like it was built into the blow molding process where there's some kind of a breakout tab that's there, and I'm thinking it was for a breathing hole since this thing's hollow. Basically, it's a big black hollow water bottle, and with that black out in the sun, it heats up air and collects moisture, and then it condenses on the cooler side at the bottom, and especially overnight it condenses. And then the overhangs sort of become reservoirs for the water to sit in. The bottom line is the thing definitely needs to be able to breathe, and since it does breathe and it gets hot, it's going to collect condensation. So the trick is to get that condensation out, let it drip out where it's not going to be a bother. So the solution I came up with was just to add some small drain holes at the very bottom of those, the front and back where the water tends to collect. Once I had some holes in there, I tipped it up and let the water drain out, and it was quite a bit, more than you'd want pouring down on you when you're sitting in there for sure. But basically I kind of figured that with it sitting flat, any amount of water that gets in there is going to just dribble out at the corners, and it shouldn't be a problem. The other issue with the roof is that I didn't like the idea of that permanently mounted light up there. I mean, I want the light. I don't want to get rid of it. I know some people just take them off, but I'm kind of a geek and I kind of like that kind of stuff. But my thought was, especially since it's already intended to be a magnetic mount unit, that I want to unscrew it from the roof and then just put a metal plate up there so I can just pop it up there when I want it and then pull it down when I don't want it. So I grabbed a hunk of metal scrap that I had in the yard, and I made a little circle and shaped it real nice and put some holes in it to match up with the existing screw holes. And I'll mount it with the same hardware, and you know, the holes in the roof aren't a big deal. So, but it'll allow me to mount the light or take the light down without having to remove any fasteners. Well, once I got it all together, I realized that those existing bolts that were holding the light on, the caps on them are just a little too tall, and so they kind of hinder the ability of the magnet to reach the metal. So I replaced those with some others that I had on hand, and they just barely fit under there, but it does work fine. And so now that thing secures on there really nice. And that's what it looks like. And I'm gonna, when I start doing some touch-up paint on the other parts of the excavator, I'm gonna put some of that charcoal dark color paint on that so it kind of blends in. But I liked how that turned out. All right, so that was all that I wanted to cover with this video. And I'll leave off with showing you where the magnetic light can sit very nicely with the cord wrapped around it, kind of stuck to the chassis right there. So there you go.